The US dollar is dying. While there's no immediate danger of collapse, experts warn that its domination may end within our lifetime. So what if the US dollar did collapse completely? How long could the US keep its global status? Could they afford to keep the country running? And most importantly, how would everyday people be affected? Well, let's find out. Welcome to the channel. Here we try to answer the great geographic what-if questions of the world. And today we're asking what would happen if the US dollar collapsed. Now, before we jump into this alternate history, we have to establish a baseline understanding of what's happening here. In our world, the United States dollar has been the global reserve currency since 1944, meaning it's the most widely accepted form of currency in international transactions. This status was established after World War II when the US emerged as a world power with a strong economy. It was solidified further when the Bretton Woods Agreement pegged other currencies to the dollar, which made it even more attractive for international use. In this alternate timeline, we're going to assume that something happens to cause the US dollar to lose all of its value overnight. There's actually quite a few reasons why this could happen, from hyperinflation caused by excessive printing to a complete loss of faith in the US economy. We're not going to get into the how, only the what if. So let's talk about what would happen. Well, first things first, the price of imports would skyrocket. Without a stable currency, the cost of goods from other countries would become incredibly expensive, leading to shortages of everyday items and inflation. In the extreme case, a loaf of bread might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit on this. Imagine you're at the grocery store, but instead of your usual $3, the loaf of bread now costs $500,000. You pull out your wallet, hand over a crisp $500,000 bill, and you're like, wow, that was easy. I wonder if I should get some more bread. But then you realize that now that you gave over $500,000, you can't really afford anything else. In fact, you might need to start pulling out wheelbarrows of cash for basic necessities. And it doesn't stop there. A new dollar might now be worth 1/10 of a cent. The government might introduce new currency with many more zeros. But that wouldn't really change much. Your paychecks would be massive, but so are the prices you pay. So your real income wouldn't increase. Now, this is where things get complicated. With the collapse of the dollar, the US would need to find a new way to conduct international trade. They might adopt the euro, or maybe even the Chinese renminbi, or perhaps the US would just default to barter. Suddenly, trade deals with other nations would be renegotiated, causing a lot of economic uncertainty. And speaking of uncertainty, how would the rest of the world react? Some countries might benefit from a weaker US dollar, since their own exports would become cheaper for Americans. For example, if the dollar collapses and the euro stays strong, European goods will become dirt cheap for Americans. On the flip side, American goods would become extremely cheap for Europeans, causing them to buy less of their own stuff. This could lead to a global economic crisis as countries scramble to adjust to the new system. On the social and cultural side, the value of the US exports would also plummet. Hollywood movies, iPhones, and American agricultural products would all become dirt cheap, potentially flooding other countries' markets and hurting local industries. Additionally, tourism in the US would become dirt cheap, but only if people could afford to travel internationally in the first place. And now, let's talk about politics. A collapsing dollar would weaken the US's political influence on the global stage. If they can no longer afford to fund foreign aid or military alliances, they would lose their status as a world power, making it harder to influence international relations. Without a strong economy, the US might even find itself isolated on the world stage. With a collapsing currency, the government would be forced to cut spending on social programs, infrastructure, and the military. This would create widespread unemployment and unrest as people struggle to cope with the economic uncertainty. The country could descend into chaos, with protests and riots becoming commonplace. And if that wasn't bad enough, the US couldn't even use military force to restore order without a stable currency. They wouldn't even be able to buy bullets. But wait, there's more. If the US dollar collapses, there's a good chance that the internet would collapse as well. Many of the internet's key infrastructure systems run on the promise of revenue streams that are tied to the dollar. If that goes away, many companies won't be able to operate, and the internet as we know it could collapse. Now this is where the situation gets weird. As people become accustomed to carrying around wheelbarrows of cash, they might begin to lose track of time. After all, if money has no value, neither does time. Days, months, and years could just blend together in a chaotic mess. Time would effectively stop. And as the situation becomes more and more desperate, people might resort to extreme measures. There could be a civil war, an authoritarian takeover, or even a collapse of law and order altogether. Suddenly, the country is descending into chaos, and survival becomes the main priority. Meanwhile, the government would be left scrambling to find a solution to the crisis. They might try to negotiate with other countries to adopt their currency, or they might attempt to introduce a new currency of their own. But both options come with their own challenges. As all this chaos unfolds, the lives of everyday people would be turned upside down. Families would be torn apart as some members leave the country in search of better opportunities, while others stay behind to try to salvage what's left. Those who stay behind might live in fear of crime and violence as the rule of law breaks down. Suddenly, the simple act of walking down the street becomes a risky endeavor. And all of this begs the question, how long could the US keep this up? How long could they keep the country running without a functional currency or banking system? Well, the answer is probably not very long. Within weeks or even days, the country could descend into total chaos. And even if they managed to stabilize things, they would never regain their status as a global power. So now let's turn this around and look at the potential upside. If the US dollar collapsed, it could actually benefit some people, especially those in developing countries. A weaker dollar would make it easier for them to repay their debts, and they might even see an influx of foreign investment as global businesses seek to take advantage of the low cost of labor. And even in the United States, those with large mortgages or student loans might find their debt easier to repay. The burden of these debts would be lessened overnight, and that could help stimulate the economy. It might sound far-fetched, but the collapse of the US dollar could actually be beneficial for some people. But now, let's raise the stakes. What if instead of the US dollar collapsing, the entire global financial system collapsed? Banks across the globe would go bust, sending shockwaves throughout the world economy. Countries who had invested heavily in the US dollar would suffer tremendously, plunging the world into a deep depression. If this happened, there would be a massive exodus away from the dollar, accelerating its decline. Investors would scramble for assets that still held value, driving up the price of gold, commodities, and even cryptocurrencies. Suddenly, the dollar is practically worthless, and other currencies are on the decline as well. And this is where things get really interesting. What if the US dollar didn't just collapse, but became completely irrelevant? Overnight, the entire country adopts a new currency, leaving the old dollars behind. The US dollar, once the world's leading currency, is now considered trash. People throw it away, not realizing that it used to be one of the most valuable currencies in the world. And that leaves us with one final question. What do you think would happen if the US dollar, one of the world's leading currencies, became totally worthless overnight? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.